Hey guys, how you doing? Out there in YouTube land. Uh, I'm doing a video today that's very close to me, very important to me. And I just wanted to do this video and just throw it on my music channel. You guys know me for making covers and original music, but there's some idiosyncratic videos on there, but different things, Rudy and Butterfly Night and stuff, like flipping. But I wanted to do a video on addiction because addiction is a very serious issue now. And long ago, when I first came to Kingston, it was almost 15 years ago, Kingston, Ontario. I started using the word epidemic when I started seeing the mass amount of people that were addicted. Everybody that I knew, every single person I met in Kingston was using drugs. Like I didn't meet a single clean person. If I did, it was like walking down the street, you see that clean cut person, you think, oh, that person didn't use drugs. Now, I use drugs. I have for a long time. I suffer addiction. Well, in a sense, addiction, substance abuse, and I believe that it can be controlled. It can be, done in a healthy way, in a sense. If there's no other option, in a sense. And they say that addiction is a disease. So I don't believe that. Like, a disease is something that you contract unwillingly. You don't go out and say, I want cancer or I want hepatitis. Oh, hey Rudy, hey buddy. You don't go out and say you want any of these diseases that you that you have. Or that people can contract. It's not like that. Addiction is not willing. You don't do it willingly, and maybe in the beginning you're a habitual user. You willingly use habitually, but you don't want addiction, and nobody wants to be in the throes of addiction and suffer the plagues and the stigma and the plight that comes along with addiction. Nobody wants that. So to me, a disease is a bad term for it because that basically says that everybody that does drugs is going to suffer addiction. They're going to have the disease and they're going to basically die using drugs. Like, it's basically a death sentence, calling it a disease. And by them claiming it a disease or titling it a disease, they were able to sort of treat it differently, which meant they could sort of study it more and do more experiments. And that's kind of what they're doing today. Fentanyl is just something that it's crystal meth. Those two drugs, I believe, were the start of a sort of human sort of annihilation in a sense. Like, basically the lower ends of the spectrum of the social class were going to be eliminated basically through the use of crystal meth. And they thought crystal meth probably would, in my opinion, probably would have took everybody out. You know what I mean? Like, especially with COVID and stuff, with people having low immunities from using drugs. And then that they put crystal meth out there for so long, and then people just got used to it. And then they put out fentanyl, and that was even stronger, even more deadlier, and people got used to it. So I think they're thinking like they were trying to take a sort of mass population out of drug users, get rid of the lower class. Uh, but instead, they realized that they couldn't just, take these people out because they kept getting tolerant to it, tolerant to it. With opioid drugs, we only ever knew of opioid receptors in the brain. But now we have developed opioid receptors in our spine and in our lower intestines. Even Imodium. If you take Imodium, that has a opioid in a small opioid, like a small class opioid, that helps you stiffen up the stool. And opioids do that naturally, but Imodium has one, and those type of opioid drugs don't bind to the receptors in the brain or the spine or anywhere. They bind the receptors in the gastrointestinal or the intestines, and those ones are they're not as large. They can't absorb as much of the active ingredient, the morphine or opium, whatever you want to call it, and those receptors are different in a sense. They can still take in opioids, but they do it in a different way, and they do it to a lesser degree. So you're not getting the same amount, so you're not going to get the same high. Because you're not pulling in the same amount of chemical to create the dopamine, so you're getting less dopamine, you're getting less of the high. So when we use a drug like crystal meth or fentanyl, what is happening is basically our brain is doing all the functions to get us high. It's not the drug at all, really. The drug is just the catalyst. You say you smoke fentanyl. You smoke fentanyl, it goes into the bloodstream, it travels to the brain, and there's receptors in the brain called opioid receptors. And the opioid and the receptor bind together. There's a chemical reaction, and what happens is the opioid is absorbed by the receptor. Now there's a reuptake, and that's a process where the used opioid can be replaced back into the receptors and used again. Like if you ever hear of SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that basically inhibits the reuptake of the drugs, so that way it's not put back out, and then you know what I mean, it balances it and it keeps it in a steady flow. Now, basically, with opioids, we have our receptors have grown larger. You know what I mean? So they've expanded, so we can take in more opioid, and our body can be tolerant to it. The thing with fentanyl is it has a very effective, a very big effect on the respiratory system, and you know everything that's functioning in your body. Just slows everything down, especially in your brain, your central nervous system. Once your central nervous system, the spine and brain, which is the central nervous system, once that slows down, then the body starts slowing down. Then your respiratory tract starts slowing down. Then your circulation, then you know everything starts slowing down. You can go into just basically cardiac arrest. Basically, you just slip into death. But what's going on in that process is opioids have a very powerful effect on basically sedation, and lowering the breathing, and lowering the bodily functions. So the person falls asleep, and while asleep, their body slows down even more, because when you're asleep, your body slows down the rhythms and functions of your body. And so you're sleeping, and if you're in a quiet place, you have no stimuli around you. You know what I mean? So you're not hearing nothing, you're sensing nothing. It's this dark hole you're in, and you just slip away, and because there's nothing around you, and there's no noise or nothing, you just slip away. People who overdose and have a lot of noise around them, or being tended to, will usually stay awake and usually stay free from dying. But you have to tend to them. You can't just leave them there, especially if it's quiet. Because if it's quiet, that person's just gonna slip away. Um, so, just so you know, in the case of an overdose, always take the pulse. If the pulse is very, very slight and very, very like limited, and you can't feel it hardly, then that's when you want to start really pursuing some medical treatment or medical aid, because that means the person's heartbeat is slowing down, and if it goes any further, it could arrest. And the same with the breathing, it can arrest. So you have to check the breathing. You have to watch the person's breathing. If you can, try to keep them moving, because moving will increase the metabolism. It'll help absorb the drug and help use the drug up, and get them basically less high. It'll sober them up. And give them water, because water will dilute the opioid in the bloodstream, and it will help less absorb. You can give sugar if you want. Like, make the person eat sugar or whatever. That's not really going to do much, But Narcan. The next the next step is Narcan. And when you want to use Narcan, that's when the person's breathing is very shallow. You don't see much of the chest moving. Can't get any breath on the hand, that sort of thing. That's about the time you want to use Narcan, because if the person goes in cardiac arrest, the circulatory system, the respiratory system, all of that fails. It shuts down, stops. So when you put Narcan in, it's not going to get the brain, because there's nothing circulating. So you have to make sure there's a circulation, that's still going. So if the person's passed away for 4 or 5 minutes, Narcan's not going to do anything. You can spray it up their nose, it's not going to get to the brain. You know what I mean? Because it has to go through the blood vessels. And if the blood vessels aren't moving, and because you're passed away, that's not going to travel it or take it to the brain. So Narcan is very important. I suggest if you can carry it on you, that's always a good option, because you never know when you're going to need it. I keep it all over the house and everything. I don't even do fentanyl. Basically, I just have people around that do it, and I want to make sure that it's on hand for them. So addiction is something that a large portion of us face now, like I say, and it's becoming a thing. It's very rampant in young children. 14, 15, 16, even 12-year-olds are using drugs. Like, when I first started using drugs, I was like baby. Like, I was like 4 or 5 years old. Like, my dad would give me Valium and alcohol to help me sleep. So, because I was really hyper, I had bad ADD, ADHD, whatever you want to call it. Usually just ADD, but I was hyper as hell, and I wouldn't sleep. And then once my dad got home, I was ready to get geared up. So, like, and he couldn't get me to sleep, so he'd give me Valium and alcohol. He didn't know, like, it's just a prescription pill. Like, he thought it just put you to sleep. He didn't know it was an addictive substance, and that alcohol was going to put me into the exposure of drugs and cause me to use. But it wasn't that necessarily. It was also the fact that I had severe anxiety. So when I came home one time from swimming in Parham, I lived with my grandfather who adopted me. Well, he wasn't my real grandfather, but he was the guardian that took care of me. When I got back from swimming the one day, I was shaking really, really bad, and I was in bed, and I was under a blanket, and I couldn't stop shaking, and he knew it was anxiety, so he gave me a half an exazepam, a 30 milligram exazepam, or 15 or something. And I noticed when I got up, I was very loose, and like I had no tension in my body. And it was the first time in my life that I didn't feel like really rigid. And it just felt so good. And it just felt so natural. And it just felt like that's how I should be. That's how I should be. Like I shouldn't be this, tense, whatever, stressed out person at this age. I was only like 11 years old. And, so when I stood up, I got this feeling, and that's when I realized I like these. And my grandfather, he had a doctor called Dr. Avencula here in Kingston. Avencula, yeah, it was years and years ago, probably back in the 90s or something like that. And this has been Valium and benzodiazepines like clonazepam, temazepam, Ativan, what's the other one? Xanax, all that. That's when those became popular, and they wanted to sort of research them more, and they were giving them out a lot. And my grandfather had a whole like bag, like a huge bag of pill bottles filled with these benzodiazepines, and he only got them, not too long ago. Like it wasn't that long that he had them. So like, why was this doctor giving him so many, and leaving, and my grandfather wasn't taking them, so there's a huge stockpile of them. Anybody could get into those. So the doctors are overprescribing these drugs that people aren't taking. They're getting into the youth, into the basically the society, and they're not being used. They're not being taken by the person that's prescribed. So it's out there. If a person is not taking their prescription medication, it's out there. And even if they are taking the prescription medication, it's out there. They have to, be in control of that. So basically, I got into those pills, and I took them every day. And I do believe I wound up trying to take my own life on those pills. Then I wound up in a blackout for months and months and months. My mom explained a little bit to me. And I was watching Waking the Divine, just when my mom was still with us here. Rest in peace, Mom. And I was sure I'd never seen the movie. I couldn't remember it for anything. And I was watching the movie, and I was quoting it. And I'm like, how do I know this movie? Like, this. My mom goes, you don't remember watching this every day? And I said, no. She said, you watch this every day back in Parham. And I said, I don't remember that. And she said, yeah. And you wouldn't remember. And I said, why is that? And she said, she just said you were not there. I said, basically, and I wasn't. I was totally in a blacked out cinema, benzotarded, as they call it. And I was just, I didn't know, I don't remember any of it. I cannot remember a lot of major portions of my childhood because I was taking all these benzodiazepines. And, like, it made it so I took them from age 11 to about 17, or well, 16. Then my grandfather passed away, and I had a few left, and I took those just to ease myself off them. And then, my prescription, I got 4 every day, because I take seizures, and I had severe seizures. Like my seizures stopped my heart, for like a couple minutes, and then I had to be resuscitated. Then put me in a coma for 7 days, and then basically left me with brain damage. Left side of my brain has damage on it, the size of a silver dollar or smaller. There's no activity. But I was a benzotarded, and I got into these drugs, and I suffered severe addiction. At the age of 16, my grandfather passed away. I had no more drugs, and I went free. I went back home from Odessa, where I was staying for a couple months with legal matters, and I got back home on my own at 17, taking care of myself, and I had nothing. I did good. I drank once in a while, did some drugs once in a while, smoked pot, whatever. But I never got into the hard drugs. I wasn't into that. I wasn't into pills or anything that much. And if I was, I took a Tylenol 3 or something, that's it. And so I got into Oxycontin because had bad wisdom tooth pain, and my cousin brought me over some Tech 3s or something like that. And I started taking those, and then I started snorting those, and then that's when the addiction, started. And then I started getting Oxycontin, which I didn't even know what Oxycontin was. I had no clue. I swear to God, never even heard of it. And the person says to me, well, it's just like 8 perks in one. That's all he said. It's just like perks, just like a perk. I'm thinking, this is not right. This is Oxycontin. It's a totally different prescription, totally different drug, totally different make of substance. It's got to be something different. I didn't know it was synthetic heroin. So I went home, I snorted a little line, because this is a tiny little pill. It's an 80. It's a tiny little 80 milligram pill. It's green, but they're just tiny little pills. And I didn't want to take the whole thing because I hadn't taken it before, and I didn't want adverse reaction or to die or something. And I just cut it in a quarter, and I took the quarter, crushed it, and I snorted it. And I was in the woods, like, that's where I was. I lived in the country back then. I loved it. I was right in the woods, so I went in the woods and I snorted my line, and it was like, after a couple of minutes, everything seemed so bright. Like, I still remember this very vividly, the first time I did Oxycontin. Everything, the trees looked like clearer, they looked brighter, they looked more alive. Like everything, reality just looked so much different. Like, it looked, and you felt like the feeling that went along with it was like you're just in euphoria. I guess it would be like a euphoria. But to me, it wasn't a good feeling as much as it was the seeing everything so clear and being so aware and being so awake and being so, like, there. That's how I should be, sort of thing. And so I didn't realize that this OxyContin, what OxyContin is basically oxycodone, but it's condensed. This is basically uh, concentrated really heavily, and it's a synthetic. It's a total synthetic. So your brain, doesn't see it as opioid anal- analgist, I think it's called. Yeah, something like that. Analgist, but it doesn't see it as that. You know what I mean? So it doesn't react to it the same way as your body would. So your body doesn't get the same allergic reactions. It doesn't get the same desire to reject the drug. So a lot of the time it works much more efficiently, and it's basically a sustained release, which means any drug you take, it has a sort of like a half-life. Like methamphetamine has a 12-hour half-life. Within 12 hours, half of that methamphetamine in your system is gone. And with bioavailability, there's only about 70%, so you got about 35% of methamphetamine in your system after about 12 hours. But it doesn't half-life. It takes longer to half-life after that, I do believe. But yeah, so what was I saying? I have this problem. I'm sorry, I have ADD. Okay, so the half-life. Yeah, so anyway, you ingest a drug, and it's going to function for so long. If you take, say, an aspirin or an Advil, that's going to last. The body's going to metabolize it within 2 to 4 hours, basically. That's usually any drug you're going to metabolize within that, except for like LSD and stuff. But you're going to metabolize it, and you're going to use it up. Basically, to some degree. So, with bioavailability, you get 70%. Half life, you're going to lose that drug within so long, and it's going to be out of the system. So, with the extended release, this release of the the catalyst that the opioid that releases the dopamine is much more concentrated, and it lasts for much longer. So you're getting a bigger stream of opioid, or you know whatever you want to call it, that's affecting the dopamine, if you call it opioid, and you're getting a longer stream, like so a bigger stream is more, you're getting more, and it's lasting for a longer time, longer duration. So basically your brain is not used to receiving opioid, your receptors are not used to taking that much opioid in for 6 to 8 hours at a time, and it just impacted the brain so much, and it expanded those receptors, and when they expanded, they could take in more. Once they started taking in more, then the body started receiving it in other places, and then it started creating opioid receptors there to take in the opioid, because if it's in that part of the body, the body's going to create receptors to absorb it. And one of the places that the opioids work is in the gastrointestinal tract, and it goes there after you use drugs, and the little bit that's left is still working on those receptors. The reason why we have receptors there is because it's more concentrated in the body in that area. Like methamphetamine is more concentrated, say, in the optic nerve, and the it creates uh, macular degeneration. That nerve that it damages, it's more concentrated in that area. Probably because it's whatever, for whatever reason, or and it's more concentrated in the liver. And with methamphetamine, we don't have the enzyme needed to break down methamphetamine, so it's really hard on the liver, and it's really hard on the kidneys, especially when you don't drink, because a lot of people don't drink or eat on methamphetamine, so they suffer dehydration, they suffer malnutrition. That has a very big effect on the body and the organs and stuff, and especially dehydration. Your organs will shrink, your brain will shrink, your liver will shrink, because we're made up of a lot of water. So you take all that water there, and your organs are going to shrink, man. And everything's gonna be much more concentrated. Everything you take, like a drug or a substance or a chemical, it's all gonna be much more concentrated in the body, because your body doesn't have more water. If you take, say, a cup of water, like a little teacup, and you pour, say, I don't know, an ounce of sugar in there, or a salt, say salt, there's gonna be a lot of salt. If you pour an ounce of salt, say, into a barrel, that barrel with all that water in it is not gonna, you're not hardly gonna even see that salt. Same with your body. If your body's dehydrated, things are gonna affect you big or more. They're gonna damage the body more. The tissues are gonna suffer more when the chemical goes through, if there's any damage or anything that's done, or if it's harmful to the body. And meth is, and so is fentanyl. So when you're dehydrated, you're getting a more concentrated, more, more of that chemical or a residue or whatever it is that's damaging, and it's not gonna get to the body as quick. So you're not gonna, you're not peeing, you're not sweating hardly, because you have no water in it, and it's gonna stay in your body. It's gonna do more damage than if you're drinking water. Now I suffer methamphetamine addiction. The reason why that is because I have severe ADD, and I wasn't given medication for it as a child. A child that's given methylphenidate, especially not Adderall or anything, because those are amphetamine. You want methylphenidate. A child who's given methylphenidate will grow out of the addiction, the desire to have addiction, or the potential to have addiction, and they will not need the medication as they grow up. But a person who grows up and doesn't get the medication as a child, they're going to need that medication really bad. And if they develop an addiction to stimulants, such as methamphetamine, it's going to be very bad, because that person is going to rely on that stimulant now. And basically, the methamphetamine produces much more epinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. Opioids release dopamine. That's their main analgest. That's what it does. The catalyst. It releases dopamine. But methamphetamine reduces epinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. So those are three parts of your brain that are being affected or altered by the drug, by the chemical. So the epinephrine, which is epinephrine or norepinephrine, which is made up in the brain, and it's basically adrenaline. That's what it is. It's basically for the most part adrenaline. And that's why people who use methamphetamines are often, declared, dangerous, or you don't want to mess with them, because when you're in fight or flight, it's a bad thing. You know what I mean? And if you're taking meth on top of that, you're already in flight or flight, and you go into flight or flight on top of that, you're gonna be like a madman. So they're gonna be unstoppable. So even cops don't want to deal with them sometimes. You know what I mean? But the epinephrine is like adrenaline, so that's pumping through your body. Then you have the serotonin, which is sort of balancing out your moods. It's sort of making you feel good. It's making you feel balanced and steady. And then the opioid is making you feel like euphoric and pleasure, and so you're feeling good. You're feeling in a good mood, and you're feeling well. You know what I mean? And everything everything's tension is low. Your anxiety is low. All this is being suppressed. And what happens is when you start taking opioid, for instance, oh wait, no, I was talking about methamphetamine. Sorry. But with the three, with three chemicals being used, the epinephrine, the norepinephrine, or the epinephrine, the serotonin, and the dopamine, those three are affecting each other. So with the dopamine and the epinephrine is creating pleasure. It's creating a sort of like euphoria. The dopamine is creating like a euphoria, and the serotonin is balancing that, making it so that it's not getting out of range where it's going to be uncomfortable. So what happens after a while is the serotonin receptors start to fail and basically cannot produce any more serotonin. You get serotonin deficient, and the amount of serotonin isn't enough to stabilize the epinephrine and the dopamine. So you start getting very spontaneous reactions, or aggressive, hostile reactions, impulsive actions, because this epinephrine is pumping through the system, and they don't know at what time the serotonin that they have is going to fail, and that can put a spike in the epinephrine, or it could put a spike in the dopamine and the epinephrine, or it could put a spike in the dopamine alone and create intensified pleasure, and the person goes into a delirious or whatever state. So with methamphetamine, it's really hard for addiction, because not only are you addicted to the substance, your brain chemistry is altered 3 different ways, not just one. Your body the cells of the body are changing to compensate for the chemical in your body, the methamphetamine. The cells of your body literally change; they warp and get damaged basically by methamphetamine and fentanyl, especially heroin. And what happens is the nucleus of the cell, where the DNA and chromosomes are held, it's covered in an envelope that they call like I don't know, membrane envelope or something like that. But it keeps out any foreign molecules from damaging the nuclei and the DNA. But what happens is methamphetamine especially breaks down those membranes quite well, and it goes through the pores, and it affects the chromosomes after a while. So after your chromosomes are affected, that means the way your cells are developed are going to be damaged, especially in the brain, because that's where the most of the chemical grows. And with methamphetamine, it's a chemical. So basically, no matter what you do to that chemical, there's always going to be a residue. There's always going to be an after product that is, no matter how you use it up. So in the body, it's going to create these toxins that basically have to be released. That's why people get abscess and sores and all that and stuff. And then because of the water, lack of water, but and that's why the teeth, why it damages teeth, because with people who use methamphetamine, they're using a lot of meth. They're not drinking, and because they're not drinking, the effect of the decay on their teeth is becoming very, very rapid. It's becoming very, very, duplicate or doubling. It's tripling. Because you don't have any water in there to keep that decay from happening, and the methamphetamine itself is causing the decay, and lack of oral hygiene is causing the decay, and there's so many factors that are causing this decay. And on top of that, the person is probably in their 20s or 30s at the time they're using, so after a while their teeth are just going to give out. And I do believe that fluoride does rot your teeth if you stop using it. Anybody that stops using fluoride, their teeth will rot in no time, guaranteed. But if you keep using it, your teeth will stay strong. And that's the thing with fluoride. You can't stop using it. I'm telling you right now. But so they have classified addiction as a disease. Now, no, we'll go through this. We'll go to the disease part first, because they classify addiction as a disease. Now that is like a terminal sort of life sentence basically. A disease you don't get rid of it. So that's basically like saying a person with addiction is doomed to be an addict all their life and die, and that's it, die from their addiction. That's not true. Now, we look back in many years ago, many people, especially stars, people with support groups and people with support around them, family and stuff, they got out of addiction. The reason why people are not going to get out of addiction is because they're kept down, because society keeps them down, because they have no support, they have no job, they have no car, they're scrimping by, they have nothing, they have kids that they can't take care of, they have so many problems in life. Well, they can't deal with all this, so the drug use that's there, and that's what they use. You know what I mean? So a drug user, it's going to suffer more. It's going to have more problems in life. You know what I mean? And that's what's going to keep the person using. You know what I mean? It's not the fact that the drug. It's the person's lifestyle. It's guaranteed. You take a rat and you put him into a isolated tank and give him water, clean water, and water with methamphetamine in it. He'll drink the clean water at first, but then you go to the test of methamphetamine water. He'll keep going back more and more, and he'll drink more and more and more of it. And then he will stop drinking the clean water, and he'll just basically kill himself drinking that stuff. He toxifies himself. But if you take that same rat when it's been in that rat cage for a month, and it's suffering severe signs of addiction because it's drinking so much and it's ingesting so much and it's just doing that all day. You take that same rat and you put it into a pen or a cage that has lots of activities, other mice to interact with, and things to keep it occupied, and a good, clean, healthy environment, as opposed to the cage they were in that was an unhealthy environment. It's dark and it wasn't cleaned up as much, and it was a bad sort of setting. The mice that are taken and put into the tank with the other mice and the activities and stuff, they're given a choice of methamphetamine water or water. They'll start drinking the methamphetamine, but after a while they start going to clean water, and they start drinking clean, and they'll leave the methamphetamine water right alone after a while, even if it's present. So that shows you if mice or rats are the same sort of test subjects as a human being. They're the closest related to a human being that they can test on. That's why they use rats. So these rats, it shows that no matter how addicted a rat can be, and right on the throes of death, if you put it in with a healthy environment, it will stop drinking or stop taking that drug or stop ingesting that drug, even if it's present. That's amazing, because with methamphetamine use, there's only 10% of users who actually recover from meth use. And basically, it's like a life sentence for a lot of people. So to know that you can get clean from meth is one step of getting clean. To be thinking it's a disease and you're going to have it for life, that's one step to having it for life. And at 10 to 1, you're going to keep stepping that way, and it's going to be a disease that you're going to have for life. The thing with addiction, if you get to a strong sort of extended addiction, you have to really fight. You have to really, really fight for it. Like some people get that whole, I'm going to do it one day, it just happens, it's a miracle. But with people who are really addicted, it's going to be a fight for you, and you're going to have to do it for a long time. You're going to have to fight for a long time. You have to keep telling yourself you don't want to do it, because you have to switch your brain over. You have to stop telling your brain you want the drug and start telling your brain you don't, because the reason why you want the drug so much is your brain is telling you you do. You've gotten into that habit of sort of, basically saying, I want the drug. Once you start telling yourself you don't want the drug, then that's when you start to change, and that's when progress starts to happen. But it's going to be slow for some. Well, so this disease thing, the reason why they declared addiction as a disease is because they could treat it differently. They could sort of, say, well, now we got to do more research on it, and then we got to do this and that way they get more funding for it, and then they could produce more pharmacological or pharmaceutical, sorry, pharmaceutical products, and they could they could keep enforce or enforcing addiction in people. It was just a cycle, and so they're doing. I believe that addiction is basically a social status. Like it's a social status sort of control. Like they want to keep the low low, and they want to keep the high high. I mean, everybody that is in a low social status does drugs. Everybody, and like everybody that I know does it because I'm in a low social status. So that's who I'm with. Like I can't go with the high mucky mucks because they're not going to accept me, and I'm not even accepted by the low mucky mucks usually. But they're better people usually. But so like you're you're an addict. You're living a life where you have no car, you have no food, you have no, your children are in horrible states. Like your family life is a mess. And these are the ones that are affected the most. The ones that have bad family life, bad home life, all that. And these are the ones that wind up getting into the drugs because they take all those people and they class them and put them in a group, in a community in society. Like certain areas, like the ghetto, for instance. That's where you find all the drugs and all the black people. Well, of course, everybody's going to be a drug addict there. That's where all the drugs are. Like they're not over there where all the people that are clean are because there's no drugs over there. When they're prevalent, everybody's coming up and asking you if you want crack or heroin. You're going to take it, especially if you use. So I mean that is a pitfall for addicts, and by them saying it's a disease, they basically wrote everybody off, and it's just like, okay, you're an addict. Well, see ya. You don't need any medical treatment because you're not worth it. You won't do anything about it, and you're just gonna keep using drugs, so we don't want to have anything to do with you. And you're dangerous if you use meth, so we don't want to have anything to do with you because you're sketchy, and we don't know what you're gonna do if you're on fentanyl or pass out or die, so we don't want you near. So it's always this stigma that's going around with it. Now I'll let you know. Like I'm talking to you right now. I don't. You might not even know I had an addiction. Maybe you would. I don't know. It all depends on the person. But at the same time, I smoke and snort crystal meth. I have for like 15, 20 years. So like, I used to inject it as well. I used to be an intravenous user. I had a total psychological breakdown and lost my mind because of drug use and because of my life issues and what I was going through, and not dealing with things. And I lost my mind, and it was like basically like a child. Like I had to have somebody come to the bathroom with me for me to bath and for me to go to the bathroom. It was terrible. Like, the only way I got out of that was using drugs. Believe it or not, I started taking methamphetamine, and I was on Ritalin as well, so I take the Ritalin and I take it for extended periods of time, and I do some introspective analyzation. I got inside myself, and I learned how to still my mind. I learned how to breathe. I learned how to control a lot of my mental illness, and I did a lot of writing. I did a lot of studying, and I did a lot of just things that would help me, things that would get me ahead. And I became a spiritualist. I went through 4 stages of spirituality, which took years. And at the end of it, I finally got the message, the symbol or sign that showed me that I became a spiritualist, which was a homeless person telling me, "You walk with God." When I threw change in her hat. And that was the only thing she said to me. And she looked me right in the eye. She was reading a book, and she looked right up at me, right in the eyes, and she goes, "You walk with God." I just looked at her and I said, "Thank you." I walked away because at that time I was looking for the message. I was waiting for the message, and as soon as it happened, I knew what that message was. But anyway, so I've been a spiritualist. I don't lie, cheat, or steal. You know what I mean? And I'm very firm on that. I'm impeccable with my word. I do not lie. And if I even make a mistake telling somebody something, I'll go and tell them, "I'm sorry, this is how it is." I will not lie. And if somebody thinks I'm lying because I made a mistake, I'll clear it up. I don't steal anymore. I used to steal, especially when I was in my addiction, because that's the only time I stole was for my addiction. I hate it. I didn't like doing it. I don't never like stealing. Never like doing that sort of thing. Even when I was in the needles and I was in the worst addiction of my life back home, like I never stole anything. And there's opportunities where I could have stole things, but I didn't do it because I'd rather withdraw than do that. And it's just not me. And so I withdrew quite a bit, and I was in a bad way there. But so addiction is basically the byproduct of society and the lower class. They want to keep the lower low and the high high, like I say. So basically, if you're in a lower class or low denomination of tax bracket, whatever, low social status, you're pretty much gonna suffer addiction. You know what I mean? That's how they want it. And addiction, since it's the disease now, and the Hippocratic oath and everything, you know, they just don't want to deal with it. And there's hundreds, thousands of people out there suffering and dying. And me myself, I am a total advocate for, getting people clean and getting people off of drugs, and getting a clean life and getting a better life. I mean, even if you want to use periodically, just don't use every day. That's when it gets bad, and that's when addiction happens. Is everyday use. Addiction also happens when you smoke a drug, or when you snort a drug, or when you use a drug that's not ingested via the stomach. You know what I mean? If you're using a drug by snorting it, or injecting it, or smoking it, you're gonna have addiction, because it delivers quicker. There's a larger amount that gets to the brain. There's a larger amount that is used to create the chemical effect, the dopamine and everything. So you're going to get more, and that more is going to cause you to be addicted. If you use a steady amount, like for instance, a person that takes their painkillers. If you take a certain amount of painkillers, you're not exceeding a certain dose, so you're not toxifying yourself. Once that toxification starts happening, that's when you start experiencing the addiction, because it's starting to alter the body. And when you stop taking it, the body's going to suffer withdrawal because it's being altered. If you keep it that same level, like if you take a Tylenol and it's 400 milligrams, say that's the max dose. Okay, so you take that 400 milligrams, it's going to metabolize within so long, and it's your body is only going to be able to take in so much of that. You can only take in so much. If you take 2 or 3 of them, those extra 2 or 3, they're not going to do anything more for the pain or do anything more for the action that it's acting on. It's just going to make you toxified. It's just going to toxify your body. There's going to be chemicals in your body that you don't need, that are harmful to your body, and they're not being used in the right place, so they're just going to float around your body doing all this damage. You know what I mean? It's going to be useless, and it's going to toxify you. It's not going to be used up, and it's going to come out in your pores. It's going to come out, it's just going to make you sick. And that's basically what addiction is. Their drugs they're neurotoxic. They're neurotoxins. They alter the brain, and they cause reactions, and they cause basically to poison the brain. Your brain shouldn't excrete that amount of dopamine and epinephrine and serotonin and all that. You shouldn't do that. But I wrote down basically what I think addiction is, and I think it's a process. It's not a disease. It's a process that it slowly develops, and it can slowly go into stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3, stage X, which is fatal. But it you know what I mean. You go through stages. I forget what I was saying. I see I'm doing a long video, so I'm getting confused because of my ADD. But yeah, so the stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3, and unless you reach stage 3, basically, you can still get off drugs. That's what I believe anyway. And the process is something that happens over time, and it's something that happens in childhood mainly. It can happen in adulthood, but I think even with people who start using drugs in adulthood, they were exposed to it as a child, or they knew, or they had awareness of it, drugs. So this is categories of addiction, the categories of the addiction process. So this is basically, addiction is a reliance on any chemical or organic substance or physical requirement that begins as a person begins to adapt habitual characteristics which either hinder or control an individual's ability to function independently or collectively. So that basically means that you take a drug and you're using it so much that your ability to function in society is no longer there. So drug or chemical addiction demands more assistance and medical and psychiatric care, either than basically any other disorder or any other problem out there. Like, everybody suffers addiction. There's so much health care and so much that goes into it, with the people stealing, people causing property crimes and all that, and all the courts, judicial problems and all that. A lot goes into it. A lot of money, a lot of our tax dollars and stuff. So now, addiction can be either simple, expanded, or terminal. Now, stage 1 is simple. Basically, that's the recreational stage. Expanded means it's expanded into something that's becoming a potential addiction that could be fatal. And stage 3 is an addiction that has led to compromise of the body, organs, or the brain, or whatever the case may be, to a degree that it's going to cause the person to basically die. So that's stage X. That's addiction. That's when you're done. There's nothing to save you unless there's a miracle. So, and it can be hyper, expanded, or fatal. So yeah, I want to provide a detailed overview of the addiction process and the linguistics and terminology associated with the process of addiction will be covered. First, the process must begin with exposure, this is a Okay, first the process must begin with exposure. Now that is just knowing of the drug, seeing somebody high on the drug, seeing the drugs, being aware of the drug, having the idea in your mind that there are drugs that you get high on. That's exposure, and that is the first step to the process. Okay, so then, yeah. And then you either have a predisposition or it's a compounded issue. So predisposition means basically you have hereditary or genetic predisposition, or likelihood to be addicted because of previous parents that were drug users. Compounded means you don't have that hereditary nature, but you compounded the use so much that you now have an addiction, or that you now have habitual use. Or you can have both, and in the case of both, it's really bad. But both areas are affected. Exposure is one of the two initial factors which present an addiction potential. This means the individual either has begun the process by being directly or indirectly introduced to addiction, either in exposure, which one sees in individual, or in an individual. No, wait. Exposure, which one sees in an active user using or intoxicated and has been introduced to drugs or the idea of drugs through suggestion, reference, or curiosity. If the person has a genetic or biological inheritance, such as family history, family use, or potential from independent awareness, or all three, there is each heightens the potential for addiction. So yeah, so if you have family history and you're independently aware about drugs, so you seek drugs on your own. You were curious about them before anybody told you. You seek them on your own. That's a big factor, and family history is a big factor to compounding addiction and making it worse to control. Um, or all three. Yeah, so, and there's also family use. So if your family uses as well, you'll be way more inclined to be addicted, especially if you're growing up in a family that's using, and you're going to use. It's just how it is, and that's one of the times it's really bad. Now, when you have all three of these, that's really bad addiction, and then you have it, and you might have it both compounded and predisposed. That's when you're taking all this down. So in this process, you take the person, you go through these things, and you say, okay, so say they have simple uh, addiction. So that means it's not lethal, it's not fatal, it's not a daily thing, it's habitual, or it's recreational. This is Then it can either be a predisposed or a compounded issue. So you learn whether the person is predisposed, or whether they used without having family history, or whether it's both. And that tells you how much addiction potential they have. Then, if the potential, or the family history, the family use, and the independent awareness, that all tells how much potential a person will have for addiction. So this is like a litmus test to sort of know where a person's at with addiction. If the person is either active, non-active, or which is in remission, or resistant remission, is a user who is neither active or non-active, and since the person has in, in, encouraged the process to begin and activate, a user who is active trying to recover, or non-active, a user without trying to take the steps to recover. So basically, you're either an active user, a non-active user, or an active user who's trying to recover. So the person who's trying to recover is, they're working their best to stay clean, and what that means is you have to stay clean. You have to take vitamins. You have to drink water. You have to eat. You have to sleep. You have to do everything possible to remain healthy, including physical activity and healthy mental activities. Counseling, all that. You need to do all that to maintain your addiction, not even to get off it. That's just to maintain it. And then if you encourage the process, basically, if you're a habitual user or a recreational user, you can encourage the process by using more and wanting to use more and going partying more and all that. That makes it even worse. Uh, so the addiction is either independent, prolonged, or compromising. Independent indicates the addiction affects the person solely, has physical dependence and tolerance, and is an issue. It is and it tolerance and is a issue. Yet the person using has not begun to affect the person's health, life, or living conditions, and it is a limited issue. So that basically the first stage of this, the independent, basically that means that it indicates that the person is using, but they're independently in control of it. So they have, they're able to stop whenever they want. It's just a setting thing. They just do it at certain times, and it has been used to start non-daily. Yeah, and they're not using daily. It hasn't affected relationships or their relationship with their friends or family. It does not cause any social, just like social problems, and there's no extended tolerance, and it has not begun to affect the biology and organic compounds of the user's body. And the user is a person taking steps to quit. Has begun to cause health. Okay, now the next stage, which is basically prolonged, means an issue the person is turning. Okay. So the prolonged means they've been using for a long period of time. They've been basically, the body's changed, the biology has changed to account for the drug. Um, they don't have control of it anymore. It's affecting their families, affecting relationships, it's affecting everything, and that's when the addiction it's compounding, it's getting worse. Then compromising means they have reached a stage where all these things are happening from the second stage. Your family your friends and family are suffering. Your communication with your friends and family is suffering. Your social life is suffering. Your job, work, everything, all that, health and everything. So all the areas are being affected, but it's to a terminal degree, which means the person is dying. They have liver damage. They have hepatitis C. They have something that is incurable, and they don't want it. They don't want the cure for it, and they're just going to let themselves die. So that's terminal stage X terminal, and that can either be willingly or not willing. That can be you're going to die because there's no other chance for you, or you can get a liver transplant or have to take the hepatitis C treatment, and survive, but it's up to you, sort of thing. So, and then complex requires an in-depth treatment and affects most of all areas and strong. Yeah, so that's what I just mentioned to you. Then addiction is either stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3. Stage 1 is stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3, which is stage X. Stage 1 is serious and long term, but it's not an active mental or physical health risk, and it presents illness, and it does not present illness that threatens the life of the person. It affects only parts of the areas of addiction, and recovery is high. So that basically means that you're in the first stage. All the things that we just went through there, they're low, and that means you're in stage 1. So after you went through all of what I just mentioned here, this is where you're going to put the person in stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3. So if you're stage 1, you're basically a low active user. You're not using every day. You're not having problems with your relationships with people. You can keep a job. You can keep a healthy lifestyle. Everything. You're not being affected physically, like body or health wise. Everything is fine in your life except you're using. So that's stage 1. Stage 2 is very serious and habitual, and has begun to present lifelong struggles and affects physical and mental health, present and non-present illness that threatens life. Okay, so basically stage 2 is basically you're starting to compromise yourself. You're starting to have mental problems. You're starting to have health problems because of the drug, and you're starting to lose sort of stability over your relationship with people, over your jobs, over your ability to function as a normal person in society. All that, it's all altered and affected. So that's stage 2, and stage 3 is basically terminal. It has all those that I just described at the max potential and everything before that, and you have a fatal disease. So that's stage X, and then that can be either be willing or non-willing, and then that's once you reach stage X, there's very little that can be done. So we want to keep people from reaching stage X. We want to keep them, by doing this test, we can see where they're at, and then we can work with them to get them the help they need. So if it's stage 2, they need more, help, and you can see what areas are affected, and you talk to the person about their family life and whatever, and you see what areas are affected, and you treat those. Stage 1 is basically you can get the person off the drugs. There's still at this point, and they have a chance, and you can still help the person even with medications, if needed, or psychiatric treatment, counseling, that sort of thing. Do all the process to help the person. And so stage 1 means the person has a high potential for recovery. So you want to work on those people. Basically, in a sense, second, because the people with high potential are at risk for stage 3 or stage X, which is fatal. So you want to treat the second stage first before the people with stage 1. Because the people with stage 1 could be told this and still go home and do and make provisions by themselves to stop using drugs. They don't need the medical treatment. But the stage 2 needs medical treatment, and that's when you have to step in and treat those people first. Stage X, basically, that's you treat that however it comes. Like the person comes in, you treat them because this is stage X. They're dying, so they need treatment, they need help, and you help them. Basically, that's all there is to it. Addiction is something that we did not control. And for the majority of people who suffer addiction, is from prescription medication.